Welcome to Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito from Private Vista. In this podcast, we draw from years of experience as well as guest specialists to help you create the life you imagine. Join us in this journey as we enlighten and empower you to align your lifestyle to help you achieve your goals with a clear picture of your future. Now, let's get to the show.
And welcome to Dollars and Cents with your host, Nicole Romito. Nicole, good to see you. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing today, Bill?
I'm doing really well. We're emerging from winter as we're taping this. We're into spring. I love the idea of the trees starting to open up and the flowers getting happy. The pollen I'm not so keen on, but that's just the price we pay.
Right? Can't be like everything about it at one time. We gotta have some downsides.
So what do we got on the table today?
Yeah, I'm super excited. As you and our longtime listeners know, I specialize and focus on helping people who are going through a divorce or are newly divorced. We've had episodes before where we've talked about the legal aspects, clearly the financial aspects. Myself and my colleagues have done a few episodes there. And so we've saved the most important and best for last, and that is the emotional aspects of divorce.
Oh, there are emotional consequences to divorce?
I mean, usually there's like one or two that might flare up while going through the process. And so to that end, as you know, I am the numbers gal, part of the divorce. And so I'm really excited to have in studio with me today, longtime professional and personal friend, Dr. Lydia Richardson. So welcome in, Lydia. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really nice to be here.
No, absolutely. And I know you and I have worked on with many couples who have gone through divorces. So we've had the opportunity to see one another in action and certainly collaborate. Because as you and I know, no matter how many zeros there are to the left of that decimal point, lots of emotions certainly come with the financial aspects of divorce.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So before we get into our conversation, I'm going to give a short background so our listeners know a little bit about you. As I mentioned, Lydia Richardson is a licensed clinical psychologist, divorce mediator, collaborative coach, and child and family specialist. She has provided services to adults, couples, and families in a variety of settings for over 20 years. She is so passionate about alternative dispute resolution and does everything she can to help couples divorce with less conflict so as to promote happier families and more productive co-parenting. She believes that families can transcend the difficulty of divorce and evolve into happy and productive individuals and co-parents. One of the things I know she loves about the collaborative process, and which I did as well, is really working in a team environment where you have the people from kind of the three-legged stool, as I call it, the legal, financial, and then emotional side of divorce. And so I'm sure, since we're both passionate about it, we will probably be touching on collaborative divorce for those listeners who may not be familiar with that divorce process. Lydia, I know I just did a brief highlight of some of your kind of professional background. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what you enjoy doing when you are not helping couples and families either get through or proceed after the divorce process?
Absolutely. I keep telling people I'm a new grandma, and I realize my grandson just turned 2. So one of the things...
Not so new anymore.
Not so new anymore. One of the things I enjoy is FaceTiming with him. My daughter lives in Atlanta. I'm very active, a lot of my own self-care and keeping myself sane as I go through this work is doing yoga, walking the lakefront, exercising the best I can. And cooking and baking is another one of the many things I do. Salsa dancing. Huge for self-care.
I know. I love that. I want to get out there with you one of these nights.
Yeah. We need to do that. So a lot of different things. And we'll talk more about that as we get into this. But one of the things I always tell clients and try to help people with is figure out what is your jam and what are the things that help you recharge and renew.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of what you personally do always leads me to believe that you definitely walk the talk. And a lot of the things that, you might recommend, or if we're, reading about things or listening to other podcasts, a lot of the things you incorporate personally are things that you also recommend for your clients.
Absolutely. I presented recently as part of a mediation training, and I know this will age me, but some of you out there might remember the Hair Club for Men commercials.
Oh,
and the president.
Guess I'm right there with you, the aging, because I do.
So the president would get on and say, I'm not just the president. I'm actually a client, and there'd be this photo op of him with his full head of hair. Yes. By the same token, I am also divorced. I am now remarried. I am also a stepmother. I play a lot of the roles in my personal life that I help people with in my professional life. So I'm working not only from professional experience, but also from my own life experience. Some good, some bad, trying to help people not make the mistakes I made.
Yeah. I mean, even though you were professionals and we've been both through our own divorce and certainly many, many others helping our clients, we're both still human, right? So
Absolutely.
We still bring that human aspect. And we also know that every person is unique to themselves as well. So.
Yes.
All right. And then before we get started, I was remiss, and I'm super excited. My listeners know that I always love a good 2-part series. So Lydia has been generous enough that we are going to have her on for 2 parts. Both will be talking about the emotional aspects of divorce. And we're going to start off first with the first part will be about taking care of yourself. And then Lydia will come back and we're going to talk about if you do have children or maybe other family members that potentially would be impacted or, very close to you. How do you take care of them through the process? But one of the things you'll hear Lydia and I emphasize is it's really hard to take care of others if you're not taking care of yourself. I know, and I actually got this saying from Lydia, is you need to fill up your cup. So then you're able to kind of pour over or pour yourself into the others that are depending on you. We find it's really hard for many people to even think about that. So, right, maybe you want to start, Lydia, with some of the common concerns or objections you hear when you're trying to coach your clients on, I understand you have these kids. I understand you're worried about the impact to them, but we need to process you first, mom or dad.
Yes. I think a lot of people coming into a divorce process have been neglecting themselves for a long time. Sometimes that's part of the unhappiness in their marriage, their relationships. Sometimes it's been a long-term issue for them. And you're right. People come in, and especially if they have children, and I know we'll talk more about that later.
Yes.
That's their focus because that's what we want them to be focused on, of course. So yeah, a lot of times the challenge is just, okay, let's talk about you. And that can be tough because, of course, when someone's going through divorce, they're going through a multitude of difficult emotions. And often part of being a good parent, if they do have kids, is that they've shut down those emotions so that they're not showing them and exposing their kids. And so part of this work is kind of helping them find that balance of addressing their own stuff, so to speak, when it's appropriate to do so and with the people it's appropriate to do it with, and not when it's not.
Yes, I agree. And I'm going to make a note because one of the things we often come across, and I will say I'm always so grateful when there is a coach on the divorce team, because I went to school for finance. I took psychology 101. So I got the hierarchy of needs and the dogs, right? That's all I can offer. So it is really, I feel like the client is best served because then they can work with you to kind of understand how much should I be sharing about finances? What's the appropriate time? What's the amount of information and things like that? In particular, when you have children who might be teenagers or even young adults. So I'll make a note of that. So we'll touch on that in the second part, because that is oftentimes a question either you and I get asked or we see it happening and we might have been able to help the conversation go a little better.
Oh, yeah.
So back to kind of, taking care of yourself, whether you have kids or not. We know that many people feel like a failure when they're getting a divorce, even if they were the ones who initiated it and or wanted it. It is the end of a relationship. It's certainly whatever process you choose. It's not something that's typically done really quickly either. So why don't we maybe talk about, a little bit of how you are, if someone comes to you and they're thinking about getting a divorce, they're already in the divorce process. What are some maybe tips or techniques or questions that you ask to help them try to start thinking about things and with the idea that they then are taking care of themselves through the process?
Yeah, I have so many, so I'm going to do my best.
Yeah, we could have a 10-part series.
I know, we could. 10 hours and 10 parts, right? I guess let me quickly just give a little context here to make sure that everyone understands that everything I talk about today and in the next one about children, right, is primarily thinking about couples and families where there's not any interpartner violence or domestic abuse or things like that going on, all right?
Okay.
Those cases are ones that really are very specific and might need to be dealt with in a different way. And the other thing that's important is that I come to this work, and one of the things that I can be most kind of helpful with clients about really is this notion of finding joy again. And that's what I love about this work, right? People coming here to a divorce process, coming to me, are oftentimes in the lowest point of their lives. Right. And they're feeling awful. And as you mentioned, they're having terrible feelings. And sometimes they're feelings of shame or failure, regret. They may have already begun their grieving process. And the last thing they can envision is that this will somehow lead to some transformative process for them that will end up actually in a better life, where perhaps they're happier and more joyous than they've ever been. So that is the context I bring to this work. And I can talk about some of the things that both I know professionally help, but also that I've done personally. Great. The first thing I typically tell anyone who comes to me talking about or even considering divorce, and this is whether it's in my personal life or professionally, is take your time, take a breath. Don't be in a rush. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And you wouldn't train for a marathon in a week or even a couple, nor should you think that you're going to prepare for a divorce process that quickly. And so that can be really tough for people to hear, especially the person who is the one initiating the divorce, because it takes so much strength. And sometimes it's taken so long for them to get to that point that once they're there, they just want to be done. Right? So it's a marathon, not a sprint. And a lot of other things we talk about today, I'll keep bringing it back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because you raise a good point, and one that is pretty common is the person who asked for the divorce or initiated it, they generally have been thinking about it for a while, and they may have been talking to their therapist about it and have, like you said, have started the grieving process. And so they truly are looking forward and ready to go in their new direction. And I know we both have seen the person who either the divorce, to them is a complete shock and surprise, or maybe, they knew things weren't great, but they didn't think it had come to this. And so I know you have to work with the person who's kind of, maybe, to use your marathon analogy, maybe they're at mile marker 10 and their spouse is at mile marker 0. So what are some things that you do to kind of get the pacing to maybe come a little closer together for both of those spouses?
Yeah, well, great question. And it's a great challenge that we face in all of the collaborative divorce work. One thing I typically will recommend to anyone or ask them about is, are they in therapy? I don't want to assume that they are.
Yeah.
And
good point.
I very often encourage couples or individuals at this place to consider discernment counseling. So that's another term maybe that people aren't familiar with.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think a lot of people are. And even if they are, it's always good to have a refresh. So why don't you maybe explain for our listeners what that is?
So discernment counseling is a very specific protocol that differs from traditional marital counseling or couples counseling. And I do both types of work, so I can speak to this from experience.
Great.
But discernment counseling has a very different goal, right? As a couples or a marriage therapist, I'm working typically with two people who have come into my office with the goal of saving their marriage or working on the marriage. Discernment counseling, on the other hand, has a very different goal. The goal of discernment counseling is to get clarity on whether or not the challenges that you're facing in your marriage can be resolved, and also to get a better understanding yourself of how you have contributed to those issues. So as I said earlier, right?
Wait, what? You want me to take responsibility?
Yeah, exactly.
It's always the other person.
It's always the other person.
But not everyone's perfect like you and me, right?
Of course. But this is why I'll take you back to my context or my framework here of finding joy, right? And your future joyful life of fulfillment is not likely to happen if you haven't done some exploration of yourself, right? And it does take two to tango. And no matter how much you might be feeling now or during the process that it's all about your spouse, even if your spouse is the terrible person you make him or her out to be, it's important for you to get a feel for why you coupled up with that person so that you don't, do it again.
Exactly. Yes.
We're here to prevent that happening.
Break the pattern.
Right. I'm here to try to set you up not only for a good divorce, which I realize sounds crazy. Who talks about a good divorce?
Right.
Well, we discernment counselors do, because another part of our goal when the couples that we work with in discernment work decide that the path they want to go to is divorce, rather than make a decision that they do want to work on trying to repair the marriage, is to then help prepare them for what we call a good divorce, which means a divorce process that is going to stay connected to their goals, their dreams, be in the best interest of their children, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. And I do want to reiterate that even though you're thinking about going through a divorce, or if you are in the process, really, it can be about, I want to highlight the last few words Lydia just shared, and it's based on your goals and needs. Oftentimes we'll hear, people are like, I want half of everything, or I want everything. And sometimes those just aren't even feasible at all. But even if they are, from a legal perspective or from kind of how the judges would weigh in on it, we have found that by working on what, again, it sounds really odd, but what both of the spouses are looking for, you really do come out of the process more whole. And certainly we'll talk about, that I think everyone can kind of figure out, if you're going to continue to co-parent, that's going to be a huge positive impact for your co-parenting relationship and definitely for the kiddos. But also, even if you don't, just you as a person, and like Lydia mentioned, you might get into another relationship. And so if you're not entering that with a lot of resentment or anger or hurt, sadness, there's a whole host of emotions that you probably will experience more than once. But again, just like kind of what are you taking with you as you move forward in life?
Absolutely. I think about, and one of my colleagues coined this phrase, but essentially, if you're thinking about divorce, it's time to really get your house in order. And of course, that also sounds strange, right?
Right.
But as Nicole, as you just mentioned, right? People come into divorce with all kinds of expectations. And another thing that I very strongly encourage anyone considering divorce to do is educate yourself. Reach out, avail yourself of the professionals out there in various fields who can give you the knowledge and information you need so that you're not coming into the process with completely unrealistic or outrageous goals. So,
Right.
For example, go to a Nicole And if you're not the person who in the marriage was handling the finances and feeling completely on top of that and, can recite backwards and forwards what your marital balance sheet might look like and things like that, most of us aren't, it can be so helpful to consult with a Nicole. Have Nicole do things like run projections for you, help you with all of the anxiety that you have about how you're going to manage after a divorce. The hard truth is most families' standard of living, or at least lifestyle, does change post-divorce unless they're fortunate enough to have plenty and plenty and plenty of funds, right? Because unless you are already living in 3 or 4 homes as a married couple, you're now going to have the same level of income supporting multiple households.
Exactly. And whether you are involved in finance or not, we all know that 2 households are more expensive to run than 1.
Yes.
I think to add on to that too, I agree. Whether it is having someone, and we'll talk in a minute about the difference between a coach versus a therapist, because those are both mental health professionals, but they help you with different parts of the divorce and through different ways. So you definitely want to have someone you can work through your feelings with or the emotions.
Yes.
And then also, as Lydia said, with the financial, most people always start with the attorney. Lydia and I are not saying you don't need an attorney. You do.
Yes.
Each person will need their own. An attorney can only represent one of the spouses. But by having the other common is a better word. Everyone has emotions, and there's some financial aspect of the divorce. So Lydia can help you with what are your hot buttons. She can help work through, is the house, if it is so important to you, like let's kind of unpack what's going with that and how realistic, is that goal? I can certainly help from the financial aspects of, if you do decide to keep the house, what other choices come with that? One of the things I always like to say is you do have choices. You may not like them, but you do have choices. And so let's kind of explore them and understand from a financial perspective, what do each of those mean? And then Lydia can help you kind of from the emotional perspective. And then, of course, the attorney is your advocate to make sure that you legally are making informed decisions. And they can certainly weigh in on what some of the other, their financial aspects, but they also have a legal bent, whether it's child support or maintenance or what the actual allocation or division of the marital assets are.
Absolutely. I mean, the wonderful thing about a collaborative divorce process is that it is a team approach. So as Nicole just said, right, there'll be a couple of attorneys. Oftentimes there's a mental health professional on the team, and oftentimes a financial person on the team. And so that means that you get experts in their fields helping you with the parts of your divorce that are pertinent to them. I would never go to an attorney to get co-parenting coaching help or to figure out the best plan for time sharing with my children. Mm-hmm. In the same way, I would hope that Nicole, a financial professional, wouldn't come to me for financial advice.
Right.
I could give her some high level advice, perhaps, right? But if you have access to a Nicole, why be doing that work with Lydia?
Right.
And so, yes, you have us all there. And the beauty is that, as we all know, money and emotions go together. Why?
Absolutely.
There's so much anxiety that most people have about money. There's also just memory. There are, things that are tied to money, whether they're things that we have undertaken in life, things our parents did, right? Family drama, things like that.
Right.
And so I love the fact that I can, for example, have a meeting with a client and have Nicole there. And it doesn't have to be a meeting that has both of the attorneys. If what we're trying to work through is, as in Nicole's example, right, the emotions around the house.
Right.
I know I can help them with the emotions, but I also know as a person that I want information and data, right? Don't just talk to me about my emotions.
Exactly.
When I'm in a place where I have to make some really tough decisions, give me the data, help me out with regulating my emotions, And then I know I can make the best decision for my family and for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are shockingly coming to the end of this episode. I know one thing, there were two things I know you wanted to make sure that to cover. And one is, what is the difference between a coach and a therapist? And we're talking about in the context of a divorce. And then I would also say then, why don't let's do that. And then we can wrap up with maybe if you want to highlight like your one key takeaway, or if there's maybe one or two of just kind of the key things that you'd like our listeners to take away from this conversation.
Sure. So I'll say briefly, the difference between a coach and a therapist is that, and we have this as kind of a metaphor we use in collaborative process. You know, as your therapist, I'm going to help you if you've got this big, huge bag full of stuff. Unpack your bag, repack your bag. Let's go through the bag, right? All that baggage that we're all carrying around as many times as is necessary until you feel like that bag is just beautifully packed and it's now light enough for you to carry around with you and not impede you in your everyday life. As a coach, let's pretend you've got this big, huge bag and we're trying to get you through airport security and you can't carry it. As your divorce coach, I have no interest in helping you unpack that bag. What I'm going to do very quickly and very briefly is take a look at the situation, take a look at that bag, and try to corral some help and get you and your bag onto the plane. So as a coach, I'm much more future focused. I'm much more problem solving focused and much more practical in a very quick and in a real time manner than I probably can be as a therapist. And so as a coach, I'm oftentimes saying to a client, hey, you know what? That is really important stuff. But I'm here to help you get through this next meeting, or we had a goal or an agenda for our meeting today. So this is one of those times where I'm going to tell you to take that to your therapist. I really want you to process that with them. And that's not because I'm saying it's not important or in any way trying to invalidate it. I'm just trying to respect your time and respect our process here.
Right.
One thing I do urge clients is it's so important that they have therapists who are willing to collaborate with the mental health professional on their collaborative divorce team.
Yes.
The worst thing that can happen is when we are working at cross purposes because we haven't been able to communicate. And the therapists very often can be wonderful therapists, but they don't know a lot about divorce work because why would they? I didn't either until I got involved with the Collaborative Divorce Network. And so it's really important for me as a coach to be able to communicate to your therapist, let them know what my role is and what my role isn't. Because of course, oftentimes the therapist hears, oh, you're working with this licensed clinical psychologist. Well, wait a minute, I'm your therapist. What's going on there? So that's an important communication. In terms of key takeaways, I think, again, joy is there for you. And I think about this whole process, and the takeaways I want you to have are that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And if it helps you to have the framework that you're really preparing yourself for your next best life, the next best life, the new type of family structure that you're going to have. And just as you wouldn't think that you could train for a marathon in 2 weeks, nor would you grab the first pair of running shoes that you saw, right? Give it the same amount of thought, mindfulness. Self-care is so important. Therapy is going to be an important part of that. Taking care of yourself in so many different ways and getting help from professionals, whether it's a Nicole, whether it's an attorney. There's so many programs out there where you can get free information about divorce and do all of that. And don't be in a rush to do anything that's irrevocable. Don't go running out to file for divorce immediately. It takes the control out of your hands and puts it into the hands of the court. So really explore collaborative process, do some consultations with attorneys, do a consultation with a mediator. Our Collaborative Divorce Illinois organization has a website, lists of professionals on there, all of whom are trained as mediators, trained in collaborative process, all of whom can help you get on the right path.
Great. And the only thing I'll add on is, as much as you can, try to, as Lydia said, talk with professionals who specialize and focus in this area, and just be making sure that any information you're getting, you can't trust everything you read on the internet, right? Or hear, ironically, on a podcast.
Right. Exactly.
Maybe we'll edit out that last line. But you just want to make sure that you're getting accurate information from people who do regularly work in the divorce arena. All right. Well, as I said, I know we could talk a heck of a lot more. We will, for our listeners, Lydia will be back. We're going to release these episodes back to back. So stay tuned for those of you who are divorcing and you have children, because we're going to talk about that situation next.
Nicole, I have to say, I really appreciate these episodes you do when you talk about collaborative divorces, because as a person who's seen a lot of people go through some pretty ugly divorces, and and I'm sure both of you understand. You're like, it doesn't have to be this way. I wish you could do it differently. So I do. I can make fun about whether divorce is emotional or not. The truth is, it is. And I really respect this conversation a great deal, and I'm looking forward to part 2. In the meantime, what is the best way for people who are listening to this podcast who don't know you and maybe are thinking what you're saying is interesting? How can they get a hold of you? What's the best way for them to reach out and get a hold of you?
Lydia, why don't you want to share your contact info?
The best way really for me is via email. I do have a website, so you can find me if you just Google Dr. Lydia Richardson or richardsonpsychology.com. But email is my best contact, and that's drlydia@richardsonpsyd.com. Or if you go to my website, you'll see info@drlydiarichardson.com.
Nicole?
For me, it would be either on our website, which is myprivatevista.com. On the homepage, there's a contact us button. You can put in your information. Please reference this episode, and I'll be sure to reach out to you. And then, or you can call 312-831-4370, and our receptionist will be able to connect you with me.
That's terrific. The other thing that you can do that's really not hard at all is if you are listening to this podcast and you're not a subscriber, become one. All you have to do for that is hit the follow button. That way, when episode 2 drops, you'll be notified and you can tune back into this conversation and give it a listen. And I would also ask, if you like the podcast, give it a like or 2 or 3 or 4 and share it with people. Let people know about it. Word of mouth promotion would be very much appreciated. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker on behalf of Nicole and everybody at My Private Vista. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Dollars and Cents Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito, sponsored by Private Vista. Visit our website at www.myprivatevista.com or give us a call at 312-831-4370. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Private Vista is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is neither indicative nor a guarantee of future results. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data or other information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Any opinions, news, research, analyses, prices, or other data or information contained in this presentation is provided as general market commentary and does not constitute investment advice. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties expressed or implied as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions, or results obtained from the use of this information. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors, LLC assume no liability for action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to this information. The information is provided as of the date referenced. Such data and other information are subject to changes without notice. This was created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors LLC or any of its affiliates.